Thank you for joining us, everybody. I'm here again with Neil Shepard. We are today going down the road of how to understand energy use because the energy system that we currently operate with is very complex. And so we'll turn it over to Neil, and you can take us along the presentation path.
Thanks, Guy. I just wanted to review to some level how complicated our energy system is. And we're going to look at a type of diagram that many people may not have heard of called a Sankey chart that had to be developed just to try and capture our energy system. And so I'm going to go through a couple of these because they differ wildly. This is from the Energy Information Agency Monthly Energy Review 2021. And let's just go from upper left down to lower right here. We've got sources and percentages of the sources. Petroleum, we've got the energy amount measured in quads and the percentage. So then we've got natural gas, where the arrow is, coal, renewable energy, and nuclear power. And renewable includes, in this chart, is not including nuclear. You have to watch for this when you look at energy data. Sometimes nuclear is lumped in with renewable. Sometimes hydro is lumped in with renewable, as it is here. So renewable doesn't always mean wind and solar. It sometimes means wind, solar, hydro, and everything else that's renewable. And it sometimes includes nuclear. But in this chart, nuclear is broken out separately. Hydroelectric is within renewable energy. And if we just start with petroleum in the upper left, you can see these major, if you will, arrows, and their thickness supposedly designates their percentage roughly. 68% of petroleum moves over to be used in transportation. And then natural gas. There's 3% of natural gas, and this blue goes over here to transportation. What else contributes to transportation? Well, looks like renewable energy contributes to transportation. That would probably be solar and wind and other renewable energy contributing to the electric grid. And also note that this puts the electric power sector down here in the middle, so that you can see that the electricity retail sales. And then there's this wonderful category called electrical system energy loss. And I would like to draw the attention, first of all, and then we'll discuss the fact that the total amount of electrical sales is 12.5 quads, 35% of the total amount of energy used for electricity, but that our energy system, and this may cause a lot of people to fall out of their chairs and bump their head, and we are indemnified from liability when you discover that energy losses within our electrical system are 65% of the energy that goes in. Guy, anything you'd like to gloss over here?
That's an enormous number. Oh, the energy loss of 65% is astonishing. And I wonder if quads stands for quadrillion barrels. Do you know? Again, the electrical system energy loss, 65% represents loss from the system, is an amazing number. I don't think most people are familiar with that. And I'm a little surprised at some of the things that are separated out into here. Transportation, I understand that. Industrial, that can mean any number of things. Residential, of course, I think that's pretty straightforward. But what is commercial? And I guess I'm trying to figure out what's the difference between industrial and commercial.
Yeah, these are categories. Every chart has to make these reductions. Quads does refer to quadrillion British thermal units. So a quad is a convenient unit for describing national and world energy resources. One quad is equal to 293 billion kilowatt hours. That's the equivalent of 183 million barrels of petroleum. It's the equivalent of 38.5 million tons of coal, or 980 billion cubic feet of natural gas. It's an amount of energy in brittle. In fact, I love the fact that I just mispronounced British as brittle, because Britain has become very brittle. So we shall be calling these brittle thermal units. And so a quad is is a certain number of quadrillion brittle thermal units.
And that's a big number.
It is. And so you can see already, this is a simple chart. We're going to get a little more complicated here. So let's look at this next one. So this is from Lawrence Livermore Laboratories. And this chart does maybe a little more to trace out the questions that you were just asking. Let's start on the left. We now have, and this is from 2021, so it's fairly recent. We have solar, nuclear, hydroelectric broken out. We have wind broken out. We have geothermal broken out. We have natural gas, coal, biomass is broken out, and petroleum. So let's see where these go. This is more usefully charting electricity generation right here. Look at how the inputs there are. We've got coal at 8.9, natural gas at 12.5. We've got wind, hydro, nuclear, and solar going into electricity generation. Now, notice that the electricity generation yields two big bars. One is a peach-colored bar that goes down into the same categories: residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation. Whereas there's this massive gray bar that goes to this field called rejected energy. And in this chart, there are gray bars shown from every sector in a category called rejected energy, which is a euphemism, you can look it up, for waste. So indeed, this is now showing that of the energy from petroleum that charts over here into transportation, I'm now at the bottom right, this massive green pipe of energy going into transportation. There's a few other inputs there from biomass and natural gas. Biomass, I'm pretty sure, means biodiesel, but our transportation system produces far more waste than service. The industrial system is about 50-50 waste versus service. Commercial is slightly less, residential is slightly less. Given that all of these use electrical generation, the spectacular amount of waste or loss of thermodynamic losses involved in electric generation are still astonishing in this chart. Guy, comments?
Yes, they certainly are. Can you imagine being rejected energy? I mean, how bad would you feel?
I really love that term. I mean, they can't just call it wasted. That's too stark. They call it rejected, as if someone rejected it. Did you ever reject that energy, Guy? I don't recall rejecting any full energy.
I've never turned down any energy. It so seldom comes my way.
Right.
And the proportion between rejected energy and energy services, it's 2/3.
People may not know that in our electric generation system, the capture, when you use coal and light a fire and create steam to turn a turbine, or you use natural gas to create heat and turn a turbine to make steam, or you use petroleum in a gasoline or diesel engine, obviously you've felt your engine get hot in your car, and you have to actually have a cooling system to take most of that heat away. And if the cooling system breaks down, you know that your car will overheat and become unusable. And as you're hurtling down the highway in whatever petroleum-based vehicle, I think it's about 35% to 40% of the energy of every gallon of gas, even in a very well-tuned, high-tech engine, is wasted. It creates heat in the system and is used up in friction and incomplete combustion. And the same is true for coal firing an electric power plant or natural gas firing an electrical power plant. In addition, with electricity, the transmission of electric energy over long transmission lines that you see in the countryside loses power. The power losses from AC, alternating current losses, are substantial. The power losses from direct current are even more substantial. There's people who are experts at AC versus DC. DC requires much thicker cables and a lot more copper to create a cable to transfer that power or transport that power over a grid. And so alternating current is part of the historic reason why we use alternating current and not direct current, because the copper cables would have to be 1.5 feet wide to adequately transmit direct current across the country. But there's losses with both, and that's just one of several losses in the electric grid. Comments?
You know, you referred to these folks who are experts at alternating current and the other one that
Direct current.
suddenly, right.
Yes.
And I think those people formed a band, didn't they, in the 1960s?
AC/DC. You're right, and you can consult them. Some of them are aging out, though. It's sad, Guy, when you and I find that some of the rockers we listen to are now in old persons' homes or leaving us.
You know, what amazes me even more is we still have founding members of the Rolling Stones that are playing, that are on tour.
Despite the massive amount of drugs they did.
Right. And they're in their 90s or 80s. They're incredibly old.
I don't think you and I did enough drugs growing up, so we're not in as good shape.
That's probably right.
So I suggest that people start to visualize what it means if one is going to remove things in our system that use petroleum, yes, and make them use electric. So, and those things could be cars that currently use petroleum, or appliances in the household that currently use natural gas, and you're going to make them use electric and think that that's good. And it might be, but notice that electric generation uses coal. Whereas natural gas, your natural gas water heater uses zero coal. I want you to be comfortable knowing that when you use your natural gas powered stove or your natural gas powered water heater, that you're using zero coal. Whereas I want you to know that if you drive an EV, you're using some coal, unless you live in one of the few states that has zero coal, or one of the few electric power grids that is not currently relying on any coal. But if you want to use no coal, don't use electricity. Use natural gas. Guy, am I speaking an untruth here?
No, not at all. You know, there's no way out of this trap that we have created for ourselves. We have come to depend upon fossil fuels in each of their varieties. And you want to trade in one for another? Okay, fine. But you're still trading in one for another. Never mind that civilization is a heat engine based on 5 peer-reviewed papers by Tim Garrett. All that aside, you're just switching out one thing for another, and it's the devil you know, as opposed to the devil you don't.
Right. As we've said in prior discussions, nuclear is continuous generation. Natural gas, coal, petroleum can be used, and some biomass facilities can produce a continual power curve known as baseload. But wind and solar cannot. There's one form of solar that can. That's called concentrating solar thermal. That's where you use a system of mirrors in the desert to heat a boiler on a tower usually, or in a steam pipe, and you heat water just like you do with either nuclear or natural gas or coal. You heat water to turn a turbine. And we have innovated concentrated solar thermal in 2 main countries, the United States and Spain. And we proved that it works, but somehow we just have not committed to build those kinds of solar facilities enough. And they're big, they're expensive. You can't put concentrated solar thermal on every rooftop. These are giant plants, and we built a few of them in Southern California, and they generated massive amounts of electricity, almost as much as a nuclear power plant. And there's no real limit to how much you could generate in the U.S. Southwest or in North Africa or in Spain, which is a very sunny country. You need very sunny, intense sun. So it's suitable for the U.S. Southwest, which is blessed with sun. But we did not focus on that kind of solar. So when I say solar here in this chart, most of it, 95% of it, is photovoltaic panels bolted to someone's roof or in big installations in a field. And as we've said, that solar and wind being intermittent, and solar obviously only operates during daylight hours, you're not getting power from solar at night. Wind, you might. You could get wind almost any time of day. There's certain times of day in certain regions that are more windy, but these are intermittent, and these other forms of electric generation, that is natural gas and coal primarily, and nuclear, are the only source of what's called baseload electric generation, which is what we really depend on. Any comments, Guy?
It's an incredibly complex system. I think people should be aware of that. Look at all these different lines going all these different places.
Keep them.
Going to the trouble to figure this out. The Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory folks went to tremendous effort, and still we have these approximations, right? I mean, it's only petroleum to the first digit. Yeah, all of these are only to the first digit. And which is, we're talking millions of BTUs in each of those point one and point two.
I think quadrillions.
So, right. This is unbelievably complex. And thanks to the folks at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory for making this relatively easy for the rest of us.
I want to move to the last of my Sankey diagrams here.
No, I like the way you went to a simplified version.
This one was commissioned in 2018 by ARPA-E. That's the Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy subgroup, from a company called Other Lab. And it's breathtakingly complicated. It's got many more sub-labels as to what is what, so that you can see that residential sector is broken down into residential electric. Some of these, unfortunately, are not completely labeled here, so you actually can't read them. But you've got everything: motorcycles, intercity school transit over here on the green, domestic carriers, freight carriers, food, beverage. You could break this out, and this chart does. Again, in electricity, you look here and you see this massive amount of generation losses. Here is what it's called. Do you see where my arrow is here?
Oh yes, it's right there in the middle of the slinky.
Right. But the funniest thing about this chart, and I really want you to be sitting down, Guy, so that you don't fall and hit your head when I read you this. This is from the otherlab.com, the consulting firm that got the contract to create this chart from the ARPA-E group. And are you ready for this? It says, the work on mapping U.S. energy usage began in 1973 when Jack Bridges, working for the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy, used the Sankey format and improved upon it in a book called Understanding the National Energy Dilemma. It was obviously in the 70s when we realized we had a bunch of these dilemmas. The committee was charged to, quote, develop an energy display system which, in less than an hour, could give an extremely busy person a fairly complete understanding of the size and the complexity of our national energy dilemma. That busy person was meant to represent decision makers in the US Congress. So the result of all of this work was to create this diagram, whose premise is that a US congressman or woman could use this in less than an hour to understand our entire energy sector. I mean, is this for Saturday Night Live or what?
I was going to say, less than an hour. I don't think I could read all of those words in less than an hour. This is unbelievable amount of information represented in this graphic.
And if you did read it, you'd come up with some questions which would require the following people to be on speed dial: a nuclear engineer, a petroleum engineer, an electrical power industry engineer, mining people, manufacturing people, wind and solar and hydroelectric experts. If you had a single meaningful question after reading this, you would need to have all these people on your speed dial ready to answer your question.
Well, those congressional representatives must be a lot smarter than me if they can understand this graphic in less than an hour.
Yes. If this diagram can truly give our current Congress people an understanding of our entire energy system so they can solve our energy dilemma, I will eat my shoe leather.
Fortunately, those are our congressional representatives. They all are loaded up with this kind of information in their brains right now,
They
right?
must be so loaded. And what do their brains tell them? Their brains tell them, give those oil and gas companies more leases and more exploration as soon as fracking possible, so that the population isn't complaining about high energy costs and inflation for the next election. That's how their minds work.
Uh, Hard to believe we're in trouble if somebody can make a graphic like this one.
Right. Now, there's a note in the middle, and I would try and magnify it, but that would probably lose it. So I'm just going to read it. It says, the secret to success in reducing fossil fuels is massive electrification. If we are really going to solve climate change, we need to transform this sector. The electric grid needs to be at least twice, probably 4 times as large as it currently is, and much more distributed. We need every kind of low carbon energy in approximate order of their capacity for impact. Solar PV, nuclear. We need to improve and deploy more baseline nuclear fission type at the same time as developing fusion. I kid you not, that's a note in there. Wind, massive ramp up of offshore as well as onshore traditional wind. Hydroelectric, large scale. In conduit and small scale. Geothermal, wave, tide, biomass, biogas. Although all of these will be comparatively small in contribution, they will play an important role in niche geographies. Guy, the answer is clear. You just have to read the fine print in red here. The secret to success, massive electrification.
I can't believe people fall for this.
They published this. ARPA-E used our tax money. Other lab got the contract to put this all in this smiley chart here. And they said this, they wrote this nonsense.
And people continue to believe it. For the last few weeks, I've been reading and hearing on a regular basis that electrification is going to save us. We can get off fossil fuels if we electrify it. Really? Really? Where do you think that electricity comes from, folks?
It is odd because the same people, most of them are not willing to expand nuclear. Put aside what you and I think about nuclear for the moment. If you're not willing to expand nuclear, then what else is it that contributes this massive amount to the electric grid that we already have, which is, everyone agrees, is insufficient for our current use already, our current demand. So if you're not going to expand coal, because coal's bad, and you're not going to expand nuclear because nuclear is bad, then you're going to have to expand wind, solar, hydro. The same environmentalists are against hydroelectric dams because they interrupt the biological systems and ecosystems of fish and aquatic life. There are a few types of hydroelectric power sources, such as penstocks, which are pipes where you simply pipe the water, that are less impactful. They have a much less impact on fish if you do it right. You don't end up ruining the habitat for fish going up and down rivers. But those can be developed, but they're nowhere near as powerful as damming a big goddamn river and stopping it in its place, turning it into Lake Mead and generating hydroelectric power. And I don't know any environmentalists that think that's a good idea. So you're not going to expand hydro. Guy, what are they thinking? Where is the massive electric resource going to come from?
I don't think anybody's thinking, for starters. And over the course of the last decade or two, there's been a major push to get rid of dams, to tear them out because of what you already mentioned, the disruption to ecosystems. And so we're tearing out the dams and we're going to increase hydropower. I'm not sure how that's going to work. We're going to get rid of coal and we're going to use less gas, less oil at the same time.
And less nuclear. Yep.
It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. It can't be done. And there's a few people willing to point this out. And when they point this out, they're accused of adopting right-wing talking points. This is not a right-wing or left-wing thing. It's physics, it's engineering. Go get a degree. If you're so committed that this is possible, go get a degree in electrical engineering and actually learn how electricity is generated. And then pull out your slide rule and figure out exactly what you're going to transfer over to generate the massive amount of electricity, which is already massive here, over 60% of which is a waste. Maybe you could solve that. Maybe, I mean, devote yourself, go get the PhD at MIT and figure out, can we generate a watt of electricity without losing 60% of it? As I was saying, and we'll close out on this, the well-intentioned environmentalists and advocates of renewable energy and zero emissions and so forth, if we take what this message says here in red, the secret to success in saving us from climate change is massive electrification. A sector that is 60 or more % wasteful of whatever energy is put into it. And if we've said they don't want coal and they don't want natural gas and they don't like nuclear and they actually don't want more rivers dammed up, we went over that, hydroelectric, but they somehow think hydroelectric has to expand as well. There's some other categories here: geothermal, wave, tide, biomass, biogas. Some of those have problems with them, biomass and biogas, but they want those expanded. But the writing here in red says those are just niche. So it's calling for massive solar and wind. And in fact, this document calls for nuclear expansion. But I don't think most environmentalists are ready for that. And the question we were asking, Guy, is where's the electricity going to come from? It needs to be double or triple what it is on this chart soon. What do you make of that?
Have you seen the cartoon that has a dog clearly in hell, surrounded by flames? The dog says, "This is fine." That's what this reminds me of. This is fine. Are you kidding me?
It's extraordinary. And so what I said was, if an environmentalist is really serious about this, I really think they need to go and get the PhD in electrical engineering or nuclear engineering or energy at MIT or some other really good place and figure out where the electricity is really going to come from, rather than just mouth off and finger point at whatever neighbors and friends they have who haven't yet got an EV or changed their gas appliance for an electric appliance in the belief that that's good, or changed their gas stove for a conduction cooktop. I mean, all these things that we, the consumer, are supposed to do, when I don't see the mining industries, the extraction industries being asked to make similar changes in their practices. I see them being given new leases and new concessions to open up the land and drill holes in it and inject toxic chemicals into it to get more of what they need. I don't see an answer on the massive question of batteries, the batteries that EVs will need, the batteries that storage that will be needed for the new supposed grid that will have battery storage for the ability to compensate for the fact that wind and solar are intermittent. Imagine the mining that's going to create. So I just don't see it, Guy. It's well-intentioned. If I could wave some magic pixie dust and make it happen tomorrow, that we have everything electrified and we have the electricity to do that, and the electricity is magically not from anything that's damaging the planet, wouldn't you sprinkle that magic pixie dust tomorrow or right now if you had it?
Yes, of course. I remember when I first moved to Tucson, and I would take the waste and separate the recycling from the garbage. And there was another category that was for batteries, because they're so nasty that they were taking the batteries and doing something with them that was better than just throwing them away. And after doing that for a few years, I went back and they said, "We don't take batteries anymore." I said, "Why not?" "Well, it takes at least 20 years for them to contaminate the water supply. And so we just throw them out, because, anything longer than 20 years doesn't matter." And that was probably 30 years ago. I'm sure this is fine.
A little cadmium in your glass of water, what's not to like?
Wow.
All right. Well, we will close out this one right here and move to another one for next session.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.